Genetic superiority, as it turns out, is a rather touchy subject among the galaxy's elite species, particularly when some upstart primitives from a backwater solar system crashed the party with their quaint double helix DNA and adorably simple cellular structure. The Consortium of Advanced Biological Sciences didn't even try to hide their disdain during the annual Galactic Scientific Summit. Picture, if you will, a room full of beings who'd mastered the art of looking down their various respiratory appendages at anyone with fewer than 3 DNA strands. Their presentation on lesser species development might as well have been titled, "Why Humans Are the Galaxy's Scientific Joke." "Observe," announced the lead researcher, their bioluminescent spots pulsing with barely contained amusement, "how these creatures still rely on natural selection. They haven't even modified their basic genetic structure in 10,000 years." The resulting laughter rippled through the chamber like a wave of smug superiority. The human representative sat quietly, taking notes, very detailed notes, the kind of notes that should have worried anyone familiar with human history and the phrase, "Hold my beer." But the Consortium, drunk on their own genetic achievements, decided to take things a step further. They acquired human genetic samples, all perfectly legal, mind you, through various medical research exchanges. Their goal, to demonstrate proper genetic engineering by improving human DNA. They should have read the warning labels about experimental procedures on human genetics. Unfortunately for them, such labels didn't exist yet. They would later. Oh boy, would they later. The first sign that things weren't going according to plan came when the initial test results showed anomalous reactions. Human DNA, it seemed, had a peculiar way of incorporating foreign genetic material. Not just incorporating it, improving upon it. "Impossible," muttered the research team leader, their chromatophores shifting to a worried hue. "These strands should be breaking down, not adapting." The second sign was when the modified genetic samples began exhibiting properties that the Consortium's most advanced algorithms failed to predict. It was as if human DNA looked at their carefully calculated improvements, said, "That's cute," and decided to show them how genetic enhancement really works. By the time the third sign rolled around, which involved an interesting incident with a supposedly contained sample and a very surprised laboratory assistant, the Consortium was beginning to realize they might have made a slight miscalculation. In the observation room, watching the increasingly panicked researchers, one human diplomat turned to another and whispered, "Should we tell them about our junk DNA?" "Nah," came the reply, accompanied by a grin that would have sent chills down any Earth historian's spine. "Let them figure it out. They wanted to play with human genetics. Let's see how they handle the results." The Consortium had wanted to prove human genetic inferiority. Instead, they were about to learn a valuable lesson about poking bears, even if these particular bears came with DNA that had survived everything from ice ages to fast food, and was more than ready for some upgrades. As alarms began blaring throughout the research facility, one thing became abundantly clear. This was going to be an interesting quarter in galactic history, the kind that future students would study while wondering what exactly did they think would happen. The answer, of course, was anything but what they got. Because if there's one thing humans excel at, it's exceeding expectations, especially when someone's tried to prove them inferior. And this was just the beginning. The resulting chaos at the Consortium's primary research facility resembled what one might call a scientific panic attack, if such a term existed in the official galactic documentation. It didn't. But after these events, numerous species would propose adding it, along with several other human-inspired phrases like catastrophic success and task failed successfully. The modified human genetic samples weren't just adapting, they were thriving, and not in the polite, predictable way that good little experimental subjects should. No, these samples were displaying characteristics that made the Consortium's most advanced biotechnology look like a child's first attempt at protein origami. In Laboratory Complex Delta, a team of researchers watched in horror as their improved human cellular structures began exhibiting unprecedented levels of regeneration. The lead biotechnician, sporting 18 tentacles and what passed for a severe migraine among their species, stared at the readings with all 7 of their eyes. "These cells," they announced to the increasingly nervous room, "are not only repairing themselves but improving their structure with each iteration." A pause. "They're learning." In the adjacent lab, another team discovered that their attempt to enhance human immune responses had created something entirely new. The modified cells weren't just fighting off pathogens. They were adapting to and incorporating beneficial aspects of whatever they encountered. It was like watching evolutionary processes on fast forward with a hefty dose of "anything you can do, I can do better" thrown in for good measure. The Consortium's Central Committee called an emergency session, conducted in what they believed to be a secure, human-free environment. The irony of discussing human genetic potential while using communication technology that humans had already found 3 ways to hack would become apparent much later. "We must contain this situation," declared the committee head, their crystalline form vibrating with concern. "The implications of these results are fascinating, aren't they?" The unexpected human voice caused several committee members to emit startled bioluminescence. A hollow screen activated, displaying a human scientist wearing what appeared to be an outdated laboratory coat and an expression that countless species would soon learn to fear. The human grin of scientific discovery. "We've been monitoring your research with great interest," the human continued, apparently enjoying the collective shock of the galaxy's supposed biological elite. "Your attempts to improve our genetics have provided valuable insights into our own potential. We'd like to thank you for your contribution to human advancement." The committee erupted into chaos. Accusations flew faster than photons in a quantum reactor. Who had allowed humans access to the results? How had they breached the security protocols? Why were they so frustratingly calm about this? Meanwhile, across human space, research facilities were already incorporating the Consortium's data into their own studies. It turned out that sometimes the best way to discover your potential is to have someone else try to fix what isn't broken. The first enhanced humans emerged 3 months later. The Consortium had wanted to improve human endurance. Instead, they'd provided the blueprint for humans to develop adaptive metabolism that made their previous limitations seem quaint. They'd attempted to enhance human sensory capabilities and inadvertently revealed pathways to synthetic processing that their own species had never conceived. But the real kicker, humans were improving on the improvements. In a particularly memorable incident, a human researcher published a paper titled "Basic Errors in Consortium Genetic Enhancement Protocols," a beginner's guide to not messing up simple gene splicing. The Galactic scientific community wasn't sure what was more insulting, the content or the fact that the paper's methodology was fundamentally sound. The Galactic Council, in its infinite wisdom, decided to hold an emergency summit to address the human genetic situation. Representatives from every major species gathered to discuss containment strategies, regulatory frameworks, and how exactly everything had gone so spectacularly sideways. The human delegation arrived late to this summit, which should have been the first warning sign. The second warning sign was their relaxed demeanor. The third, and by this point someone really should have noticed a pattern, was their proposal. "We've reviewed the Consortium's work," the human representative began, "and we've identified numerous areas for improvement. In the spirit of galactic cooperation, we're offering to share our enhanced understanding of genetic engineering with all species present. The silence that followed was broken only by what sounded suspiciously like a suppressed laugh from the human delegation's junior member. "You want to teach us?" The consortium's representative managed to convey incredulous disdain through organs not typically associated with emotional display. After you provided such an interesting starting point. Absolutely. Consider it our way of saying thanks for the push in the right direction. The summit dissolved into arguments about pride, scientific authority, and the proper place of younger species in galactic society. Throughout it all, the humans maintained their infuriating calm, occasionally offering helpful suggestions that somehow managed to sound both genuine and slightly sarcastic. As news of the enhanced humans spread, the galaxy's reaction varied from panic to fascination. Some species immediately requested human assistance with their own genetic research. Others began fortifying their borders, though they soon discovered that conventional defenses were surprisingly ineffective against humans, who could now adapt to nearly any environment in real time. The consortium's reputation suffered what their annual report delicately termed a significant recalibration. Their leading researchers found themselves in the uncomfortable position of being cited in human papers as examples of classic misconceptions in cross-species genetic manipulation. But perhaps the most telling change was in the galactic scientific community's approach to human biology. The same journals that had previously published papers on primitive genetic structures in pre-advancement species were now running special issues on human adaptive potential, a comprehensive review of our overlooked assumptions. One particularly insightful article, written by a former consortium critic, simply stated, "In our quest to improve human genetics, we forgot one crucial detail. Humans have spent their entire evolutionary history adapting to change. We didn't give them new abilities, we just showed them new possibilities." In retrospect, our hubris was matched only by our failure to recognize that sometimes the best genetic engineering is the one that evolution has already performed. The human response to this article was to send the author a fruit basket with a note reading, "Finally, someone gets it. P.S. Wait until you see what we do next." The consortium's research facility, once a symbol of advanced biological science, was quietly repurposed. The new sign outside read, "Human Institute for Genetic Innovation. All species welcome. Previous experience not required." And in offices and laboratories across human space, scientists continued their work, occasionally glancing at the now famous motivational poster that had become something of a galactic meme. A simple image of a DNA double helix with the caption, "Thanks for the upgrade suggestions. We've made a few improvements." The galaxy was learning a valuable lesson about the danger of assumptions, the power of adaptation, and most importantly, why you should always read the fine print before trying to improve a species that had turned survival into an art form. The galaxy's most prestigious medical journal published what would later be known as the most expensive "I told you so" in history. The paper, authored by a collective of human geneticists, detailed exactly how and why the consortium's attempted improvements had backfired. The methodology section included helpful diagrams and, somewhat unusually, memes from Earth's early 21st century. What made the publication particularly stinging wasn't the data, though that was damning enough, but the acknowledgement section, which thanked the consortium for providing such an excellent example of what not to do and inadvertently funding the next leap in human evolution. The enhanced humans weren't just surviving, they were revolutionizing everything they touched. The first hint that things had gone completely sideways came during a routine diplomatic function on a high-gravity world. The alien hosts had chosen the location specifically to inconvenience their human guests. Instead, they watched in poorly concealed horror as the humans not only adapted to the crushing gravity within minutes, but proceeded to suggest beach volleyball as an after-dinner activity. "The gravity helps with the spike shots," one human delegate explained cheerfully to their wheezing host. "Anyone want to join? We can dial it up a few Gs if this is too tame." Military attachés across the galaxy began filing increasingly alarming reports. Human adaptive capabilities weren't just limited to passive environmental resistance anymore. They were actively evolving during combat simulations. One particularly notable incident involved a training exercise where humans were exposed to a new prototype weapon. The weapon failed to work on the second shot, not because it malfunctioned, but because the humans had already developed an immunity. The weapon's designers were still trying to figure out how that was physically possible when they received a helpful list of design improvements from the human participants. In the corporate sector, companies that had previously dismissed human businesses found themselves facing competitors who could literally evolve new solutions mid-negotiation. Trade agreements started including clauses specifically addressing spontaneous human adaptation and unforeseen evolutionary advantages. The Galactic stock market developed a new phenomenon known as the human uncertainty principle. The mere presence of humans in any business venture caused wild fluctuations in value as investors tried to predict how they might evolve next. Research facilities that had once turned away human scientists were now desperately trying to recruit them. The waiting list for human genetic consultants grew so long that some species developed new temporal mathematics just to try to optimize the queue. A small but growing number of alien scientists began to study human history, trying to understand how they'd missed the warning signs. They found them in abundance. A species that had survived multiple extinction events, adapted to every environment their planet had to offer, and managed to turn nearly anything into either food or a weapon, sometimes both. In retrospect, one xenoanthropologist noted, "Giving enhanced adaptive capabilities to a species that specialized in adaptation was rather like giving a quantum physicist a better calculator. The tool isn't the limiting factor. It's just an amplifier for existing expertise." The Consortium's attempt to prove human genetic inferiority had instead created a galactic superpower. Humans weren't just using their new capabilities. They were improving them, sharing them, and most worryingly for some, enjoying them. Professional sports had to be completely restructured. The Transgalactic Olympics Committee spent 6 months just trying to define what counted as natural human abilities before giving up and creating a separate division for enhanced sports. It quickly became the most watched category. In one memorable event, a human swimmer not only broke the record for underwater distance, but developed gills halfway through the race. The judges spent more time arguing about whether this constituted performance enhancement than the athletes spent completing the course. The military implications were even more dramatic. Traditional space combat doctrine had to be entirely rewritten. How do you fight an enemy that might evolve countermeasures before your weapons reach them? What good are tactical predictions against opponents who could develop new capabilities mid-battle? One military analyst's report consisted solely of the phrase, "Don't start what you can't finish," repeated for 50 pages, followed by a detailed analysis of human adaptation rates that made several senior commanders consider early retirement. The diplomatic corps faced their own challenges. How do you negotiate with a species that might literally become a different species during the talks? Several prominent diplomatic academies added human evolutionary psychology to their required curriculum, right next to advanced xenolinguistics and emergency protocol development. But perhaps the most significant change was in how the galaxy viewed genetic engineering itself. The human approach to evolution, opportunistic, creative, and somewhat irreverent, challenged thousands of years of established theory. Traditional genetic engineering had focused on precise, pre-planned improvements. Humans, in contrast, treated it more like jazz, a framework for improvisation rather than a rigid script. Their bodies weren't just accepting changes. They were riffing on them, creating new variations, and occasionally throwing in the biological equivalent of a solo. Research facilities began reporting a new phenomenon. Their modified human genetic samples were exhibiting improvements that nobody had programmed. The samples were essentially conducting their own research and development. Like they're peer-reviewing themselves, one researcher complained. We input a modification and the genes send back corrections. The humans, for their part, seemed to be treating the whole situation as an enormous scientific playground. They established the Institute for Evolutionary Innovation, known informally as the Darwin Club, where they offered to help other species explore their own adaptive potential. The application form included questions like, how do you feel about unexpected improvements? And on a scale of 1 to 10, how attached are you to your current number of limbs? Some species were eager to participate. Others filed formal protests about humans disrupting the natural order of genetic development, to which humans responded by pointing out that trying to enforce stasis in an evolving universe was perhaps missing the point of existence. The galactic community had to face an uncomfortable truth. They hadn't just failed to put humans in their place. They'd helped them break free of conventional evolutionary constraints entirely. A particularly insightful commentary in the Galactic Scientific Review noted, we assumed that our advanced genetic engineering would show humans the proper path to species improvement. Instead, they treated our most sophisticated techniques as entry-level suggestions and proceeded to show us what genetic engineering really looks like when you remove the limitations of traditional thinking. The piece went on to suggest that perhaps the greatest contribution of human genetic enhancement wasn't the physical improvements, but the way it challenged fundamental assumptions about evolution, adaptation, and the nature of improvement itself. Meanwhile, human genetic research continued to advance at a pace that made quantum computing look sluggish. Each new discovery led to 3 more innovations, which in turn spawned entire new fields of study. The galaxy was learning that there's a vast difference between engineering genetics and understanding evolution. The Consortium had tried to impose their vision of improvement on human DNA. The humans, in response, had shown them what improvement really meant. Not a destination, but a journey of constant adaptation and innovation. As one human researcher put it in a widely circulated paper, evolution isn't about reaching perfection, it's about being perfectly ready to change. Thanks for the wake-up call. The paper's appendix included a detailed analysis of how human DNA had not only incorporated but improved upon every modification attempt, complete with helpful annotations like "nice try" and points for creativity, but watch this instead. The Galactic Standard Calendar had to add a new designation, BH and AH, before human enhancement and after human enhancement. It wasn't just the humans who had changed. The entire galaxy was experiencing what scholars would later call the Great Recalibration. The Consortium's former headquarters had been converted into the Interspecies Institute of Evolutionary Studies. The building's primary lecture hall, where they had once mocked human genetics, now hosted weekly seminars on creative adaptation and dynamic evolution, the human approach. The waiting list was longer than some species' lifespans. In a delicious twist of irony, the same researchers who had attempted to fix human DNA were now attending remedial classes taught by human geneticists. The curriculum included such basics as why static improvement is an oxymoron and embracing chaos, the building block of true evolution. The humans had established what they called the Genetic Open Source Initiative, sharing their discoveries with any species interested in exploring their own evolutionary potential. The application process included a mandatory course on evolutionary ethics and a surprisingly difficult test on Earth meme history. Apparently, understanding human humor was deemed crucial to grasping their approach to genetics. One particularly successful program was titled Evolutionary Jazz, Improvising with Your DNA. The course description read, "Learn to stop worrying and love the mutations. Previous experience with genetic engineering helpful but not required." Sense of humor mandatory. The military implications had settled into what strategists termed the new normal, though there was nothing normal about it. Combat simulations had to be completely redesigned when it became clear that humans weren't just adapting to threats. They were adapting to potential threats before they emerged. "It's like they're evolving preemptively," one military analyst complained. How do you plan against an enemy that develops countermeasures to weapons you haven't even invented yet? The answer, as many were learning, was you didn't. Instead, you signed up for the Human-Led Adaptive Defense Initiative and learned to evolve your own solutions. The waiting list for this program was so long that several species developed new forms of suspended animation just to survive until their application was processed. Corporate spaces underwent their own evolution. Business schools added new courses like adaptive negotiation tactics and evolution-based market analysis. The most successful companies were those that adopted what became known as the human flexibility model, organizational structures that could evolve as rapidly as their human partners. The insurance industry nearly collapsed trying to assess the risks of dealing with a species that might spontaneously develop new organs during a routine physical. They eventually created a new category, human uncertainty coverage, with premiums that adjusted in real time based on observed adaptation rates. But perhaps the most profound changes were cultural. Species that had prided themselves on their genetic purity for millennia were now debating the merits of adaptive evolution. Young members of traditionally conservative races were sneaking off to human genetic clinics, returning with improvements that scandalized their elders and sparked intergenerational debates about the nature of progress. The humans, for their part, seemed to be enjoying their role as the galaxy's evolutionary catalysts. They established the Galactic Evolution Foundation, which they insisted on abbreviating as GEF, because, as one human explained, it sounds like something you'd name a friendly alien in a children's book. The Foundation's mission statement was simple, because staying the same in an evolving universe is the only real genetic failure. Their first major project was helping a silicon-based species achieve carbon-silicon hybrid biology, something the species had been trying to do for millennia. The humans did it in 6 months, mostly, as they claimed, because someone said it was impossible and we took that personally. The project's success led to a flood of applications from other species seeking similar assistance. The humans established a priority system based on what they called evolutionary urgency and cosmic irony potential. Species that had previously mocked human genetics found themselves mysteriously moved to the bottom of the list. In medical centers across the galaxy, human genetic consultants became the most sought-after specialists. Their waiting rooms were filled with beings of all descriptions, each hopping to unlock their own evolutionary potential. The humans approached each case with a mixture of scientific rigor and what they called creative biological jazz. Your DNA is like a musical instrument, one human geneticist explained to a confused group of crystalline beings. The Consortium tried to play our instrument for us. We showed them that we'd been practicing for millions of years. Now, let's hear your song and see how we can help you improvise. The galaxy's premier scientific journal, which had once published papers dismissing human genetic potential, now dedicated entire issues to what they called the human evolution revolution. One particularly notable paper was titled From Laughingstock to Shock, a comprehensive analysis of how we got it so spectacularly wrong. The conclusion read, "In our attempt to improve human genetics, we ignored the most fundamental principle of their evolution, the ability to turn any challenge into an opportunity for advancement. We didn't give them new abilities. We simply showed them new possibilities. They did the rest themselves and then showed us how to do it, too." As the Galactic year drew to a close, the Interstellar Scientific Committee held its annual awards ceremony. The highest honor, traditionally reserved for lifetime achievements in genetic engineering, went to humanity as a whole for revolutionary contributions to the field of evolutionary biology and for teaching the galaxy to dance with DNA. The human acceptance speech was characteristically brief. "Thanks for the push. Now, who's ready to really start evolving?" In the aftermath of the ceremony, a junior member of the former consortium was overheard asking a human geneticist how they had managed to turn such a catastrophic attempt at humiliation into a galaxy-wide revolution. The human smiled, that same smile that had become famous across thousands of worlds, and replied, "You tried to show us our limitations. Instead, you helped us demonstrate that limitations are just suggestions waiting to be evolved past. By the way, have you considered adding some flagella? They're more useful than you'd think." And so the galaxy continued its dance of evolution, now led by the species they had once tried to improve. The humans kept pushing boundaries, breaking paradigms, and occasionally developing new appendages just to see if they could. The final irony came when the Consortium's former headquarters was renovated. Above the entrance, in letters visible across the spectrum of galactic vision, they mounted a new motto: "Evolution isn't about being better than others. It's about being better than you were yesterday." Below it, in slightly smaller text, "P.S. Don't poke the bear." The humans had not just survived the attempt to improve them. They had turned it into the greatest evolutionary leap in galactic history, and they were just getting started. In the end, the galaxy learned what Earth's history had been teaching all along. Humans don't just adapt to survive, they adapt to thrive. And if you give them a new tool, they'll not only master it, but probably use it in ways you never imagined possible. As for the consortium members who had started it all, they eventually enrolled in human-led genetic engineering courses. Some even graduated with honors, though they had to evolve a better sense of humor first. And somewhere in a secure archive, the original research proposal that had started it all was preserved, now bearing a simple stamp in human handwriting. "Thanks for the upgrade. Here's yours in return. You're welcome."